Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. Several African leaders have called for the African Union to leave the International Criminal Court. Most recently, AU Chairperson and Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe said Africa must turn its back on the ICC in June. Some leaders have argued the court is abused by Western powers and specifically targets African leaders instead of other regions where human rights violations are committed by governments. Support is growing on the continent for the establishment of its own human rights watchdog, the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. This is a really important issue, after all. For we South Africans, we embraced the Constitution, which reinforced our commitment to human rights, sought to protect and promote international law, which included the whole idea of the International Criminal Court. In fact, we endorsed the International Criminal Court, and indeed our endorsement of the International Criminal Court and many of our commitments to international law have been reflected in constitutional court judgments. So the real question is, what should our attitude be to this particular issue, to the promotion of international or regional law, and how do we hold leaders accountable to human rights and abuses thereof? If you'd like to join the debate on Twitter, please use the hashtag JFYAfrica. To discuss this, we are joined by Noel Kututwa, Deputy Director of Amnesty International South Africa, Allan Ngari from the Institute for Security Studies, and Professor Gilbert Khadiagala, who is the head of the International Relations Department at WITS. Let me start with you, Professor. What do you think? I mean, President Mugabe wants us to turn our back on the ICC.
African countries are signatories, or who are signatories to the ICC, should not even contemplate moving out of the ICC, because they have already made commitment to their people, to the international community, that the ICC is essentially an important element in dealing with international crimes. But there is also movement for African countries to establish their own local mechanisms, because the ICC is a court of last resort. It's not the final, it's not the first court. So the debate about establishing an African court is important, because if the African court doesn't do its job, then we'll still need the ICC.
So should we accept that we look towards an African solution and kind of distance ourselves to some extent from the ICC?
We should accept it to the extent that if the African solution is going to work, then that is fine. The problem with the African solution, or at least the proposed African solution, has been that the amendments to the African protocol, the Malabo protocol, as it is generally referred to, is an article which gives immunity to heads of state, that whilst they are in government, no prosecution can happen or take place, not only heads of state, but other senior government officials. And that defeats the whole purpose of having an international criminal court, or a court that is supra the national courts, because the real reason of having an international criminal court or an African court is to prosecute those crimes that cannot be prosecuted in the national jurisdiction.
Okay, and what's your attitude to this?
Well, on the withdrawal question, we first heard about this in 2009, Dennis, when the African Union Heads of State and Government Summit called all the 34 states parties to the Rome Statutes, the African states parties, to withdraw. Now, it's been a number of years since this call first came out, and the Rome Statute is very clear on the procedure as to withdrawal from the Rome Statute. A state party simply just has to notify the Secretary General of the United Nations, and within a year, then that state is no longer a party to the Rome Statute. It's been several years, as I've said, and not a single one of the 34 African states parties has withdrawn from the Rome Statute.
But Mugabe would like them to.
It's true, he would like them to, but you see, states enter into treaties on an individual basis. And it's a bit, it's almost difficult to get a group of African states to then withdraw en masse. The reasons why they get into a treaty is very individual, in the sense that their national interests.
So why did they get into the treaty in the first place, if so many of them are grumpy about it?
Well, in this continent, there are several and numerous serious international crimes that happen. And as was mentioned earlier, states have the primary responsibility to prosecute and investigate, or investigate and prosecute international crimes. And where they are unable and unwilling, then the International Criminal Court
That's the role of the
comes
International
in.
Criminal Court, yes.
Yes, and unfortunately, for various reasons, states are unable and unwilling, and when they do that, the International Criminal Court, where it has jurisdiction, has to come in and has got to investigate and prosecute. So here we're looking at the situation where there are victims of these crimes, and they must remain at the center of the focus of the international criminal justice system. If states will not investigate and prosecute, and the ICC has jurisdiction over these crimes in a certain state, we should join hands with the International Criminal Court.
But the critics of the ICC, Professor, say, well, they pick on Africa all the time. And the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America, doesn't even want to be part of this thing. So who are they to complain to us?
I mean, there is some truth to the fact that some countries have not signed up to the ICC, to the Rome Statutes. Those countries have to be asked by their domestic constituencies why they didn't sign. But that's a very separate story from when did you sign and why did you sign. So a lot of our countries have signed up, and therefore we should be asking them, why did you sign in the first place? The issue of double standards is also a very separate
Well, why
case.
did they sign in the first place?
They
Many people viewing this program will ask that question, and I'm intrigued with the answer.
They signed because at the time when the ICC was created, they thought it was a good thing, that it is important.
Well, I mean, they thought they'd never be hauled before it.
Yeah, probably they thought they would never be hauled before it, but I think they were setting a moral standard here to say this is an important issue and this is an African issue. It's not just a question of the Middle East or whoever, but it is important for Africa to be a signatory to international norms around these issues, because it's important for Africa to be seen to be leading in international legality.
But when the African countries say the ICC picks on us, we're the only people it seems to ever bother about, doesn't that go to the legitimacy of the ICC itself, and they've got to take some responsibility for that? I mean, after all, they're terrible dictators in other parts of the world, when I last looked.
I think what gives credence to that argument is that, all situations currently being investigated by the ICC or currently, before the court are in Africa. And since the time that the ICC was set up, all 8 situations, I mean, it's the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's Uganda, it's Mali, it's Libya, all those are in Africa. So that's what gives the African leaders, and particularly President Mugabe, the argument to say African states should pull out. What also has gone to the legitimacy of the ICC and organizations, including Amnesty International, is called on the prosecutor to also look at other situations like Venezuela, Colombia, Palestine, and to in fact bring those situations before the court and to ensure that there is a balance.
But if you took Palestine, for example, I mean, between America and Israel, given their influence in the world, I bet you nothing would ever happen. But the African societies, they're very keen to institute.
That's the other problem, because the African situations, some of those are self-referred. You see, when the African states now make those arguments, they forget that they are the ones who went to the ICC to say, can you come and help us? Because domestically we are not ready, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the infrastructure to try these crimes. I mean, if you look at the number of victims in some of these countries, like Darfur, for instance, over 2 million people have been killed. Those are really serious human rights violations, and the domestic court systems are not able to deal with those. Yes, so then the ICC. But of course, the issue of the global politics, the geopolitics, who is supporting who at that level also comes into play, and it's a whole another debate.
Let me just take a break, and when we come back, we'll return to discussing these particular questions.